establishes his first company in Miami, the El Rey de los Habanos factory. El Rey de los Habanos, that's the company. King of the Cuban cigars. You better be ready to make some good fucking cigars with a name like that. And he was. He was. You'll see on a lot of Tatuaje boxes, or Tatuaje brands, you'll see on the band, the seal, El Rey de los Habanos. So it wasn't fully incorporated until late December 2002. So most people really say that 2003 was the year the company was established, and that is the same year that Tatuaje is born. Now I love this. I love this because Tatuaje, as most people know, was blended by Don Pepin. But Tatuaje was not just a blend. It was his very first blend that he did completely on his own. A cigar he made completely on his own to be sold within America using this Nicaraguan tobacco. And my God, what a blend it was. What a blend it was. You know, and here's connections too. Here's pairing one of the world's most gifted artisans as far as blending and rolling can go with someone who is nothing less than a genius when it comes to promotional skills within the cigar industry. So these two guys meeting up as soon as he gets here, that was a good thing for him. Because it would be later on that, the recognition of Tatuaje later on would help Pepin out as well. The funny thing was that Tatuaje is so ingrained with Pete Johnson. A lot of Tatuaje smokers I talk to don't even really know it's blended by a third party. They just assume Pete Johnson. And Pete Johnson's not a blender. So this is not the cigar, even though it's a great cigar, it is not the cigar that gets him really so recognized for who he is over here. Now, he blends Tatuaje, a couple of years go by, and Tatuaje is doing so good, and he also blends a couple of other brands. Tatuaje is doing so good that in 2006, he needs more room. He needs more space, more rollers, he has nowhere near enough to meet the productional demand that he's facing. So he decides to open another factory in Nicaragua this time and dubs it Tabacalera Cubana S.A. For short, Tacuba. Right? Tacuba. Now see, here's another connection, and this is why it's so cool that we're doing Cuban review, non-Cuban review, and mixing everything up. Because from our Cuban reviews, Tabacuba. Here you have Tacuba. So I think it's hilarious. It's almost like a shout out, to that. And who knows why he left too? You never really know. Maybe there was a beef. Maybe he came to the top of the ladder and finally came to the Cuban officials, whoever you have to go to, and said, look, I would really like to finally be allowed to make my own cigar for Cuba. And they told him no. So who knows here if he's giving Cuba a shout out or if he's giving them the middle finger. I think it's probably the, former, but you never know. And that brings us to the point where if you look at cigars done by Pepin, everything that can be done in a Cuban way is done in a Cuban way. With some brands more than others. But as a good example, look at Tatuaje. The seal is insanely Cubanesque. The way the boxes are made, built, the way the cigars are rolled, right down to the clasp being from Germany and box dates being stamped on the bottom of the box with a factory code, even though there's only one fucking factory. So at the time anyway, that we're talking about. But that's just great stuff. And it also introduces something, it's not just great stuff in terms of, we're going to have to take this band off now, in terms of, I want to be as original to the T to what Cuban cigars are as possible. It's great stuff because I believe American smokers want box dates on their boxes. I know I do. I've hated the fact that for so long, you could never tell when the fuck non-Cuban cigars were from. You know, for a time, unless there was a band change or something, you couldn't tell if a box of Opus X was 5 years old or 15 years old. Unless there was some sort of band change or some sort of indicator, signifier, that let you know it was from either this year. But even then, you would have within a few years, you know? So box dates are a great thing. And of course, don't leave out the fact that they're rolled in the Cuban style. So that's why you get a cigar like this with an amazing roll. Amazing, amazing draw, you know? So next time you are at home, if you have one, or in a cigar shop, grab a brand new box of Tatuaje Brown Label and look it over. Grab a box of J21s because that has the clasp too. Ask the guy, whoever works, to let me look at the box. And look at that box and look how, count every detail you can that's Cubanesque. From the way things are burnt in, to the wood, you know. A lot of later productions, like for instance even Flor de las Antillas, you know, fancy Cuban style art, but the boxes are, you know, with white lacquer and all that. I would say the most Cubanesque style brand was Pete Johnson's Tatuaje. I mean, that's like no paint, no frills, no. Of course, he has the other side where he does things like, you know, the Monster series, and which is as far from Cuba as you can get. But even the bands, even his Reserva bands look like Edition Limitada bands. His black bands and red bands look, you know, the second red band. Whatever happened to a new red? I guess he dropped that. Remember the red label? Those look like regional edition bands. You know, the fucking regular band looks like a Monte Cristo band. Ooh. Alright, so getting a very, not very, but a much more bassy. That sour note I've been talking about has acquired some bass. And it's almost become lemony. It's citrusy. It's citrusy. You know? There's cocoa, and there's chocolate and all that. But it's really subtle, and it's mostly in the aroma. It's most, you know, there's really no sweetness on the palate or on the tongue. Not from this one. Very subtle, very subtle. Not a sugary sweetness, you know? A very subtle sweetness. So he opens up Tacuba in Nicaragua because he needs more resources to make more cigars. He's becoming more well-known. He's creating a lot of different brands for a lot of different small companies. And it's not so much that he's created any one major brand that goes global or goes, you know, mainstream. He's just creating a lot of different smaller brands. Even Tatuaje at that point is considered a boutique brand. But he needs more room. So briefly, the difference in scale of these factories, and it's like night and day. The El Rey de los Habanos factory in Miami currently, and it might have had a few more when it first started, it currently only employs 12 rollers, but they're all Class 8 master. And they turn out about 800,000 cigars a year. 12 people turn out 800,000 cigars a year. That's fucking incredible. Tacuba in Esteli, Nicaragua, much larger, and employs currently 62 rollers, turning out 7 to 9 million cigars a year. So that's a big, big jump. And having all these new resources, in 2007, a year after that factory opens, Pepin is contacted by Ashton distributors to create none other than the Ashton San Cristobal brand. This is another Cuban brand, the Cuban name, that comes into the American market. But what's interesting to me is that it is another post-revolution brand, like Cohiba, for instance, that comes into the American market. And you always hear about Cuba, you know, Tacuba or Habanos SA suing General because of the Cohiba brand name. that lawsuit is always appealed, ongoing, decided, appealed, ongoing, decided. But you never hear a word, a peep, about them suing because of the use of the San Cristobal name. Why? Well, maybe San Cristobal was blended by Don Pepin. Even if it was, however, I mean the original Cuban San Cristobal, even if it was, however, that property would belong to the Cuban government. So maybe they're not suing because it's just not big enough. But, you know, I don't think Ashton came to him and said, we want San Cristobal. I think they came to him and said, we want a Cuban-style cigar. We want it to be as close to Cuba as possible. We want something with a name. And he chose San Cristobal. I don't know. It's just kind of coincidence, time period, him blending Cuban cigars, Ashton, San Cristobal, maybe, maybe not. But those are the facts. So now he has a huge factory with a huge company having cigars produced for them by him. And Cigar Aficionado does an interview with him at that time in 2007, 7 years ago. And at that time says about Tacuba, his factory, and him, its performance is to be envied by virtually every cigar company save Padron and Tabacalera e Fuente y Cia. So basically, he's almost, what they're saying, he's almost done in a matter of 5 years, what it took Fuente 100 years to do. Pretty fucking amazing. Pretty fucking amazing. This is a guy who knows how to get down and dirty. Of course, you know, look, we had the Fuente story on here, and you saw how many different unavoidable hardships there were that got in their way. So it seems that since the moment Pepin got here, he's had a pretty clean ride. No rebellions, no riots, no fires, no hurricanes. Life is good. He came after all that, you know? So anyway, that is 2007, and Ashton is now getting down with Don Pepin. But Don Pepin is not done building his empire. What is pretty much, I mean, I consider at this point an empire. He's about to open his third and possibly most famous, name-wise, company slash factory. So let's take a look at that. We're not quite into our last third yet, but we're getting there. This tobacco is of such thickness that it has trouble staying lit if you talk and don't puff. It stays lit, but you know, I don't want to tunnel it. It's acquiring, you know, even that sour note is starting to dissipate. Spice is completely gone. There's that subtle, faint, cocoa-y, chocolatey flavor with no sweetness attached to it. And, you know, wood right now, it's a pleasant taste. It's almost a, you know, at this point I would call it medium-bodied at this point. But the flavor is fairly mild right now. All right. So, we're going to go over second, third really quickly and then get into the rest of this. There's so much information and so much to talk about. There really may be a Pepin Garcia Part 2 with another cigar because I am running out of cigar and I still have a lot to cover. But we'll see where we get. Second part of the cigar, luckily, since we have not a lot to talk about, really not much of a change from the beginning. Pepper and spice die down, and the cigar starts to develop a bit of base to it. Sweet notes like cocoa, chocolate, they're all there, but like I said, mainly in the aroma, very, very subtle. The cigar starts to develop a bit of a citrusy, lemony taste. That's what I'm getting from it. You know, when I read about the cigar as far as on the Garcia website and as far as what Cigar Aficionado said when they gave it #1 cigar of the year, They mentioned no such thing. I'm not afraid to say it. That's what I'm tasting. And hey, it's 2 years after. Maybe the crop has changed. Who knows? I'm getting a wonderful draw. Like I said, throughout the cigar, the draw is beautiful. However, the burn has some issues. It has, given me a few canoes, slight. Main problem is it goes out really, really easily. I'm attributing that to the fact that it has a double binder, and a lot of cigars that have that, I have this problem with. I probably talk too much, but the problem with double binders also is if you smoke too slow, it goes out. If you smoke too fast, the thing tunnels because the filler is much lighter than the really thick binder around it, protecting the wrapper from the core of the heat. So the science of a burning cigar. Oh God, it's really interesting stuff. But that's what I'm getting. So let's get into the rest of it. And I'll just tell you right now that we're in my last third. I'm actually a little way past the second into my last third. The last third, I'm starting to pick up some sweeter notes and a hint of some more spices. Not pepper, no more spice, anything like that. It's becoming more creamy. It's becoming more like what I've read about it online. But we'll see where it goes. So we left off in 2006. Tacuba is formed by Don Pepin Garcia in Nicaragua. 2007, Ashton contracts him to create the Cuban San Cristobal. And just as fate has it, if we should have time, I have a box here of, no cigars in it. I have some cigars somewhere upstairs, but that's no matter. What we really wanted to look at is the box, because we've been talking about similarities to Cuban, this and that. And I have an empty San Cristobal box, Nicaraguan, non-Cuban San Cristobal box that we can look at. Since we just did the San Cristobal de la Habana episode, that would be a nice connection to kind of do an overview on. So, after Ashton contracts, a little while later, Jose Don Pepin Garcia, establishes My Father Cigars, not My Father Cigars, My Father Cigars. I used to love to do that to people in cigar shop. People come in who are like looking around, don't know about cigars, they don't really, maybe they've been around. I go, hey, you know what's really good? Have you ever tried any of My Father cigars? They look at me like I got 4 heads, like, your father? Do I know your fucking riot. Anyway, you see? I'm starting to have these burn issues. It's really, the wrapper and binder are really not staying lit well. And I have to puff a lot to get a good amount of smoke. Anyway, 2008 he establishes My Father Cigars. Now, one may be saying, one may or may not be saying, well, he has El Rey de los Habanos. He has Tacuba. Why establish a third company? Why do that? You have these other 2 companies and they're doing great. Well, there's always a reason behind everything. He doesn't establish it just because he can, and we'll see that in a minute. I will read this from the My Father website because it best explains the whole My Father Cigars bit. There's 2 dates, 2008 and 2009. In 2008, My Father Cigars was started by the Garcia family. My Father Cigars headquarters is located in the city of Toro, Miami, Florida. A spacious, well-designed building composed of all the company's executive operation offices, warehouse, and small factory classified as a boutique factory with 12 rollers, all with the highest ranking of master who were taught by Jose Pepin Garcia himself. Packing and finishing area for all brands, handmade in Miami. There are brands, of course, by Pepin made in Miami, brands made in Cuba, brands made in Nicaragua. I keep doing that. Brands in Miami, for instance, some of them cross over. Tatuaje, for instance, blended and made by Pepin, My Father Cigars, or El Rey de los Habanos. Some are made in Miami, some are made in Nicaragua. Brown Label, original, made in Miami. Red label, more medium body, different blend, made in Nicaragua. So you have some companies that within have cigars made from both areas. So kind of interesting there. Now, this is cool. In addition, there's also a state-of-the-art cigar lounge where all our clients and friends are welcome to have a talk and, of course, to enjoy the entire company of cigar brands and also the original line of Tatuaje. So that's really cool. You can go there and go in there and have a smoke and maybe even run into one of the Garcias and have a chat. I like that. That reminds me kind of like, the Fuentes, Tampa Sweethearts, except that's not Don Carlos over there. You'd have to see him, you'd have to probably go to the Fuente Toro, and you're not going to see him. So, best chances of seeing him is park your ass in a cigar shop and wait for 5 years. I'm looking for a lighter because this thing went out again. Oh, the best puffs I'm getting right now are like when I relight the thing. In 1 minute, this thing will go out. I'm just going to keep my torch here. There ain't no relighting this thing with a match right now. I mean, you can, but it's going to be a pain in the ass. So, My Father Cigars started in 2008, but on August 29, 2009, the Garcia Family Industrial Park, also called My Father Cigars in Esteli, Nicaragua, is opened. That reminds me, of course, of the, Fuente Chateau, the whole area. But this is an industrial park. And I guess the Fuente area is the same thing, warehouses, complexes, factories, all that. It had its grand opening. The 7-acre complex houses 9 buildings that make up My Father Cigars, all dedicated to an extremely well-planned tobacco industry process, never before seen in Esteli. The state-of-the-art factory consists of over 1,900 employees, all working with the tobacco from the time it is harvested to the time that it is packed and shipped out to our retailers. Jamie Garcia, president of the company, personally supervises all operations in Esteli to ensure that only the best tobacco is delivered to the consumer. The family achieved 12 lines of cigars and limited editions, all created by Jose Pepin Garcia and his son, Jamie. Very cool. So that's My Father Cigars. But why create My Father Cigars? Think about it for a second. Why do it? You have El Rey de los Habanos, you have Tacuba, you have growing regions, you have the tobacco being grown by yourself, you don't need to buy it. You have workers, masters, capable of producing millions of cigars a year. You have all these big brands contracting you. You could always use more space, you can always make more money. But is it really necessary to have a whole new complex just for these new brands? Well, there's a reason for everything. And the reason, sadly, in this case, falls to business and making money. And I kind of held this back for a reason, to stress a point. Because all during this, most people watching, when I'm saying Pepin did this, Pepin did that, they're like, sure, sure, sure. But there's a second person that, when people talk about Pepin, is hardly ever mentioned, at least in all the conversations I've had with people. And strangely enough, as we opened up this episode with the theme of connections, that person is none other than Eduardo Rivera. Remember him? Well, if you've been following along and you checked out the Casa Fernandez Arsenio cigar, you'll know very well who he is. He owns Aganorsa, the big tobacco growing operation in Nicaragua, where all sorts of other smaller companies, boutique companies, a lot of different boutique companies and major companies get their tobacco to make their cigars. Now, Eduardo Fernandez is no tiny little player in the whole Pepin epic story. In fact, he owns 50% of everything. And what happened when Garcia opened My Father Cigars, now you're seeing it. Why open My Father Cigars? Well, because you have a guy who's getting 50% of everything. Garcia opens My Father Cigars, completely cutting Rivera out. My Father Cigars is his own thing, doing whatever the hell he wants. But the problem with that is bad business. And there is a lawsuit. Say goodnight, Max.